Hello? Can everyone hear me? Amazing. I think we're going to just get started. Thank you all for coming. My name is Tori. I am with the Zero Food Waste Coalition. And if you're not familiar, we are a national coalition of organizations aligned on addressing food waste through policy at the federal, state, and local levels. Some quick logistics before we get started. So this session is being recorded and will be available on ReFed's website after the conference is over. And if you don't mind muting your phones and devices, and then if we end up getting to Q&A, it says that you should all be using a microphone, but I'm not sure if that's maybe still the case. Okay, yeah, so I think there's a microphone somewhere that you're able to use, or I can repeat the question. Okay, so today's panel is all about state-level policy. There's lots of attention right now on the ways that we can address food waste through policy at the state level, given everything that's going on federally. We heard that from Dana in our intro on the first day. So that's what we're here to do. We're here to talk about state policy, share not only successes that people have had in addressing policy or food waste through state policy, but also kind of learning from one another's failures. So if you are interested in starting policy in your own jurisdiction, you can learn from others not only what has gone well, but kind of learn from other people's mistakes and hopefully not make the same ones. And then what's great about all the panelists that we have up here today is very diverse perspectives. We have people from government, people from business, and people from nonprofits. And they are addressing food waste kind of at all different levels of the supply chain. So we have prevention, we have composting, we have planning, and I'll start with those intros. So first of all, this is not in order of what they're sitting in, but first we have Andrea. She's a senior specialist for sustainable food systems at the Natural Resources Defense Council, so NRDC. And she's a fellow state policy working group co-chair for the Zero Food Waste Coalition along with me. And she worked on AB 660 in California, which is the bill that standardized date labels across the state that goes into effect, I think, next July. So thanks, Andrea, for being here to talk about prevention. And then we also have Sydney, who's a pollution prevention specialist at the Virginia Department of Environmental Quality, who's been working on implementation of their climate pollution reduction grant. That'll have pieces of compost, food rescue, and prevention as well. And then we have Jairo, who's sitting next to me, who's the founder of the New Jersey Composting Council and the Organics Recycling Foundation. So he's an expert in all things composting and anaerobic digestion. And then finally, we have Danielle Todd, who is the executive director and founder of Make Food Not Waste, and she is a leader in all things Michigan's food waste policy work. She's been working on large-scale plans for Michigan to reach its goal of cutting food waste in half by 2030. So that gives us kind of an insight into the policy planning piece. So we're going to hear from all these experts kind of sharing their lessons. But I'll start with a kind of easy opening question for everyone, which is maybe introduce yourself a little bit more fully than the kind of one-sentence description I gave, and then kind of maybe share some more information about the project that you've been working on that you're here kind of to talk about. So I'll start with Andrea.
Thanks. Before I get started, Tori, I want to thank you for your leadership on the Zero Food Waste Coalition. It's an honor to be a co-chair with you, and since you're all interested in state policy, I'd like to invite you to join us on the state working group. We have a lot of fun, and we'd really welcome your perspectives. But I was invited here to talk about California's date labeling law, which is AB 660, was enacted last year. And for those of you who aren't aware, date labels are not federally regulated, except in the case of infant formula, and that's because of nutritional quality. We want to make sure that babies are getting enough nutrients. It has nothing to do with spoilage or food safety. And so instead, we have this patchwork of regulations and laws from state to state, from product to product. Oftentimes on a product, different companies will have different date labels, which are often erroneously believed to be expiry dates. This is a prime example of why we need government intervention, because until there is universal adoption of a standardization, we have no idea which companies have voluntarily agreed to the dual late date system, in which best if used by can be used to indicate that a product is at its peak quality, and use by is meant to relay information around food safety, and that you should really be consuming food before a particular date because of increased risk with time. But until there is universal adoption, consumers are confused and don't know which ones are meant to relay safety, which ones are meant to be quality, what exactly these dates are telling them. And this is a great prevention solution. We've put all of the resources into getting this food to people's pantries, and if they're prematurely tossing it, we've wasted all of the environmental resources that have gone into producing it. Standardizing date labels have huge social benefits, huge economic benefits. This is really a great, easy solution for us in the food waste space, especially because 80% of Americans report tossing food simply because it's past date. That's astounding. How many other of our issues reach so many people? And there are studies that show that people who are paying attention to date labels are wasting food at twice the rate of those who are not. And so really this is a huge opportunity. ReFed says that there's a benefit of $2 billion that could be achieved by standardizing date labels. It's an easy, common fix with a huge impact. And there's an equity component too, because Black, Indigenous, and people of color are more often living in communities that have low access to food and are more often getting food that is closer to its date. And so they're plagued more frequently with this question of, is this food safe for me to be eating? How do I address this date label? And so California's been trying to address this for several years. In 2017, we started to work on standardizing date labels, and at that same year, the consumer products goods industry said, we're gonna fix it from a marketplace. We will have complete compliance in 3 years. So by 2020, all of the dates will be standardized, we're good to go. And so the law at the time became a voluntary law. And in 2023, Assemblymember Irwin's staff, Californians Against Waste, and NRDC looked at our pantries, and we found more than 20 date label phrases in our pantries, and we said this voluntary standard is not working. We still don't know what these dates are meant to relay, and so we started working on AB 660. And by 2026, we will, in the state of California, no longer have sell-by dates. Any food product that has a date label will be required to have one of two dates, either a best if used by date to indicate quality, or a use by date to indicate food safety. And all food products will be required to use these two dates. It also expressly allows for the donation of food past its quality date, and we're excited to see where this will get us.
Thank you, Andrea. Sydney, how about you?
Oh, there it goes. Okay. Hi, everyone. My name is Sydney Thayer. I work for the Virginia Department of Environmental Quality. And as Tori mentioned earlier, we got a climate pollution reduction grant from the EPA, which is letting us focus on food waste in a way that we never have before. It's been something that my office was interested in. I actually started in January, so they've been interested in it since before my time at DEQ, but it's been something that our office has been interested in for a long time, and our CPRG grant is allowing us to focus on methane reduction. So most of the money is actually going to a coal mine project, and 10% of this almost $100 million grant is going to food waste, specifically the project that I am working on, which is mainly focused on colleges and universities and state agencies in Virginia. And so we're hoping to implement food waste prevention, food rescue, and composting programs at those places. And kind of the context for why we chose that scale is that there were some executive orders in Virginia that let my office already work with colleges and universities a lot. And so we knew that there was a lot of movement in that area and a lot of interest in terms of what those organizations were doing. And the other thing that was really compelling about working with colleges and universities is that Virginia does not have enough infrastructure to support food rescue, composting, et cetera, at the locality scale. We just need more of it across the state, which is, I'm sure, something that a lot of you experience in your states. And so in Virginia, waste is managed at 71 different local levels. And so we needed a lot of examples of how to do food rescue and composting and food waste prevention on local scales in local communities. And so Virginia has an abundance of colleges and universities. I did not grow up in Virginia, and so when I moved to Virginia, I was very impressed by the amount of schools that are there and available for students. And so lots of colleges and universities were already really engaged in this work, and so they proved to be a really great test ground for how to do these programs in different ways and in different settings, in rural and urban and suburban settings across the state, and at different scales. We have some really, really big state schools and some really small schools. So our goal is that we will be able to give them money, and they will be able to test pilot lots of different programs around food rescue and composting, and we'll have examples of how to scale these types of programs across the state. And so the other thing I will say about that I'm really excited about, it's been silly for me to listen to the mentions of Gen Z, because I am solidly in Gen Z. I graduated from college just a year ago, and so I'm coming to this project having worked really extensively at my college on our campus compost program, and I worked with my peers a lot over the past 4 years, engaged in this kind of thing on a college campus. And I think that there's a lot of hunger among my generation for ways to actually make a change and have solutions. I think there can be this sense that we have inherited this insurmountable cloud of problems all around us in the world. And I think that from my interactions with my peers, they're very excited about things that they can do tangibly to make a change. And so I think engaging my generation in these types of programs is a really exciting way to impact food waste. And I think as students cycle in and out of college environments, the things that they pick up when they're already in this time of change, in this new environment, when they're being influenced by their peers, that's a time when you really are going to change your habits and have new perspectives on how you exist in the world and how you exist in the community. And so I think it's a really interesting and exciting place to test pilot these things, and hopefully we'll create cycles and cycles of students who then care about these things as they cycle in and out of Virginia schools and go into surrounding communities after that.
Amazing. Thanks, Sydney, for sharing all the work that you're doing with the CPRG grant implementation. Jairo, do you want to go?
Yeah, good morning, everybody. I've been out of college for 40 years. And I went to school at University of Oregon, so I'm very familiar with the Northwest. But I live on the other side of the country. I live in New Jersey, and also like all New Jersey people, we live in Florida, part of our lives. But let me share with you a little more about how I started an advocacy. I run New Jersey Composting Council, which I founded about 7 years ago. It's a 501c6, which means that we are focused exclusively in advocacy and education, right? And then the Organics Recycling Foundation, which is more of a educational entity, it's a 501c3, right? So maybe some of you understand what those structures are, because they're very important as you set up yourself in a state to create policy, education, and so forth. But the way the whole thing started was I went to work, and I retired from work. I went back to a farm, my family's farm, and I started working with soil health. And in soil health, I learned the benefits of recycling what was generated at the farm. And on top of that, what was being consumed by the food around the farm. And so we started to rehabilitate. As we rehabilitated, our crops started to come out a lot different than the other sites around us. And so the city called us and said, hey, how do you guys do this? And so we went and started to kind of talk in groups like this to other farmers. And then the city said, well, can you educate our Department of Agriculture? Little town, but we started doing it. Then I realized that, hey, you know what? These people need some education. So I started to do some teachings and eventually moved back to the States. And when I arrived in New Jersey, I realized that the state was operating in a vacuum. And there was no coalition. There was no refed, it was just a typical group, Sierra Club and the other entities out there. But there wasn't somebody focused on developing infrastructure and sharing know-how of how to do this. And so even my practice as an organics recycling management consultant, there was nowhere to go because there was nothing there. There was no laws. There was really no know-how. So we decided to put together a coalition of industry. And the industry guys are the ones who build the technology, the machines, the pipes, consultants, engineering, some people coming from the landfill world, some people coming from the engineering world. And we built this coalition with the purpose of creating one voice within the state. And this was my first time doing lobbying at this state level. So we did a lot of planning. I was very lucky that when I put the word out there, I don't know, a lot of people showed up. I went to the Department of Environmental Protection in New Jersey and listened to them, and I raised my hand in a room of 100 people, and they asked me who I was. Organics recycler. Everybody went quiet. They never heard that before. Everybody's doing plastics, paper, everything else except organics recycling. And even though farming has always been some type of composting forever, this is one of the oldest practices for soil rehabilitation, it really had not touched the municipalities or the residentials. Some people, do backyard composting in that core group, but that's not what we're going after. So I'm going really fast to try to bring you guys to how I started advocacy. And so we went initially to the state, at City of Trenton, where the Capitol is there, and my first microphone, you got 7 microphones, and the assembly's there, and you usually target the entity. It's usually the Environmental Commission that you go to from the House, from the Senate, and then you go into the Environmental or Energy Committee in the House, and you speak related to how to improve the recycling goals and how to improve other activities like climate change emissions, saving the landfills, blah, blah, blah. And we started slowly to make our pitch. While this was happening, there was already a group of people, the Recycling Association, who had moved into a food waste ban bill, which was eventually pushed, and we actually jumped on the wagon at the last year of it, and the bill went through. This is a bill in 2020, signed by our governor, which is one of the 12 states that were mentioned earlier, I think yesterday, about states that have real food waste bans. And so New York has one, Connecticut has one, Massachusetts has one. Seems like the Northeast, and of course, you guys out here in, in this world, which is holistic 100%, have your bans. But our ban, when it came out, we were probably not positioned to understand what was really in the language of the ban. It seems like the usual players were against us, the landfill operators, even the Food Council was against us because they didn't want the generators, as in Publix and Starbucks, or none of those guys to have to add an extra bin or have to bring an extra liner. So they really pushed against us, but we eventually convinced them through education as well, and they teamed up, and the bill passed. But this bill in New Jersey, which I remember we did a press release and we were all very excited, and I was like, oh, my first year I launched this, it happened. But the bill didn't have any teeth in it. And I didn't realize that the dark forces had conspired with us to get the bill through, but they had very smartly removed the key components: enforcement, incentives, financial and tax incentives. Like New York, you can put the word out there, you put a plan, they give you $10,000, $20,000 to start a pilot. No, in our state, nothing. Incentives, you have, some type of tax incentives for your capital investment, so equipment providers will come in, and we didn't have that in there. And that word was removed. But there were some other nice things in the bill. The word started to get around, and so we realized quickly that, no, this is not gonna work. This food waste mandate, while it took national, front, everybody applauded us and welcomed us, and they wanted to know more. I wasn't really understanding until the next year when I realized that the bill wasn't promoting any type of traditional infrastructure development, which is what you need to start programs. Because you can pitch all day, pilots, you can get your municipality, your high school, but if there is not infrastructure to take that feedstock, as in food waste, there's nothing to do. And so we started to promote taking the feedstock to New York. So a lot of our food waste goes across borders. In some of them it stays, but very few because there's no infrastructure. And so we realized that that wasn't the path. So lately, we started to work with getting funds so that we can demonstrate through small root activities. So those are through backyard systems, through school generators who want to put their own system in place. Universities, we work with Princeton, we work with Rutgers, we work with BCC. We all have put systems in there. And to do that, we applied through grants, and we got the monies to demonstrate that it can happen. And then we also went to municipalities, which eventually seem to be the entities that are pushing this stuff down to their residents. And so we said, well, how do we get money? And so as an advocacy-oriented 501c6, you really cannot go get money because it's either, it just doesn't fall under the IRS rule. And so we created a second entity called the 501c3, which is an Organics Recycling Foundation. And this entity then started to go after the grants so that we can help the municipalities through, and I use the word triple P, the private partnership, but I think the new word is private partnership, nonprofit partnerships. That's the way it's moving forward. 1 minute. So all fine. We've passed in In New Jersey, we passed a recycle content bill. We are working on a tier down bill. And we've teamed up even with the enemy, with like the Chemical Council. Called us one day and said, guys, can you help us? Because we don't want our polymers going into the recycle content. We want the compostable. And I was like, Jesus, this is great. But I realized I saw how well funded these other nonprofits are. I mean, the millions. And they are very. So teaming up with them was also another strategy. Team up with your landfills, team up with your chemical count, team up with whoever you can to pass a particular bill. Then I went to Florida, which is a red state. Oh my God, nothing there. You can't even talk about you being in Seattle talking about food waste because they don't want to hear this. Out here is too progressive for them. So that state has no regulation. As a matter of fact, they introduced a bill in 2017 that removed organics from garbage denomination of recyclable. It's not recoverable. It is just pure garbage. So what happens there? You can only burn it and you can only bury it unless you do something very important. So the battle down there is very interesting because it's kind of loose, but there is some operation. So I'm going to finish there and perhaps share a little more about how those experiences can be put in place in your sites.
Thank you for that intro. Definitely a lot of good tidbits that we'll want to pull out around kind of stakeholder engagement and some of the lessons that you've learned in these different jurisdictions that seem to have very different audiences that you have to speak to. But last but not least, Danielle, if you want to give your intro.
Yeah, so I'm here from the great state of Michigan. I think we have a lot of Michigan people in the audience here as well, which speaks to the fact that a lot has changed over the last few years. When a number of years ago, the state of Michigan put together what they were calling the My Healthy Climate Plan. And they put together all these work groups to really investigate how we were going to get to carbon neutrality by 2050. And food was nowhere to be found in that plan at all. There were no work groups looking at food. And so we worked hard to, I think we have a one-liner in the whole plan that says, and there shall be a reduction of food waste by 50% by 2030. So we were really happy to get that one line in there, and we've run with it. What we quickly learned is that 2030 is not very far away, and Michigan's a pretty big state. So what our nonprofit did was really look at where can we get the biggest bang for our buck and how can we get to that goal as quickly as possible. And if you're familiar with Michigan, you know, the mitten. So Southeast Michigan, down here, where Detroit is, about 50% of the population of the state of Michigan lives in Southeast Michigan. So that's where, of course, most of the waste occurs. It's also where most of the infrastructure currently is around donation, around prevention, education, compost collection, food scrap collection, and so, and we happen to be there. So we focused our efforts really on that area, specifically the top 15 most populated cities in Southeast Michigan, which collectively represent about 3/4 of the goal for the entire state. So we are going city by city, really systematically working to prevent, rescue, and divert all of that food waste. There's no reason why any of that food should go into landfills. But what we realized through all of this was when first the My Healthy Climate Plan had that goal in it, we thought, oh, well, we'll just, you know, pass a food waste ban for the entire state and easy peasy. And of course, everyone's reaction was, you can't tell us what to do with our trash and, you know, get off my lawn and all of that kind of stuff. And so we really needed to think about this process that we're going through and going deeply into these cities, into this one area of the state, is now allowing us to percolate back to the state level and really show the momentum and the interest and the infrastructure development that's necessary, and it's creating a greater appetite for policy at the state level. So we've had to kind of go down in order to go back up. And again, I think the fact that, and hopefully all of you have met at least someone from Michigan here at the conference. I think the fact that there are so many of us here shows, the first time I came to ReFed, I think I was the only one. So we have a lot of momentum going in Michigan, and that I expect to show great results when it comes to the policy levers being pulled.
Thanks for your introduction. Okay, so now pivoting a little bit to start asking questions and hearing from all of you. The place that I want to start with is that, we have people in the audience from a bunch of different states, some of which already have thorough food waste programming and a state who's really involved, but then there are also going to be people coming from states that maybe don't really have anything yet, and they're just trying to get that momentum started. So Sydney, if you don't mind, I'm going to start with you, because I think a lot of people who have been in this kind of food waste policy space for a while were kind of surprised to see that Virginia, received so much funding through CPRG to do food waste. And I know that kind of the planning process and the application was before your time, but if you've learned kind of, from your colleagues, how that kind of came about, would be very curious to hear about that. And now that you're kind of in the middle of implementation and getting it all started, how's that been going, kind of jumping into this new space, food waste policy generally?
Yeah, so when they applied and got for the grant, I was still picking through compost bins on my college campus, but I have learned a lot since coming in. And so this really all started because there was an executive order a couple years ago in Virginia that was focused on single-use plastics. And so my office, I work in the Office of Pollution Prevention, had worked a lot with colleges and universities and state agencies on implementing that policy when it was in place. Fast forward, we have a new executive order now, and this new executive order talked a lot about recycling, but it also had a brief mention of food waste. And so there was some movement at the state level to just do more research on food waste. And so my office at DEQ worked with our agricultural sector in Virginia, and they released a report on food waste reduction strategies. And so they did a lot of research and gathered a lot of information on food waste reduction and different solutions for different sectors. But that was kind of the extent. There wasn't any money attached to that work, and so they had all of these ideas, and they'd really started research in this area, and they were really interested, but there wasn't a way to implement those things. And so when the CPRG grant funding came along, it was a great opportunity to tag this project in. Our air division at DEQ was the one who actually is leading the grant, and so they knew that they were going to request $100 million, or it's just under $100 million, to be at the top of the cap for the scale of the grant they were going on. And most of the money is going to coal mines, but they had a little money left over. And so they had a week where they realized they weren't going to use all of that money. And so they looked around the agency and they were like, who else could do something with methane? And my office had talked enough about food waste and made the connection to methane enough times that when they realized they were going to have extra money, they were like, oh, well, we should tap them in and have them focus on food waste. And so the program came together very quickly and was really a result of the work that we had already done. And we are very excited that we actually have money and ability to implement some of these solutions across the state. But I think from my colleagues and even just my short time at DEQ, having so many conversations about food waste and continuing to bring it up made it something that everyone at our agency was aware of. And even since I started, the amount of people who stop by my little seat in the office and tell me how excited they are that I am here and working on food waste is tremendous. So many people are so excited about it. And so I think it was really easy to tap into that excitement. And when there was an opportunity for funding, lots of people were very supportive of including us in that process, which we're very grateful for.
Amazing. So it sounds like it was a lot of pre-work, research, kind of sitting and waiting, and then, being opportunistic when funding came about to be able to kind of jump on it. And now that, we don't see a lot of the pre-work that goes into these types of things, but then I think a lot of us can relate that, we're doing a lot of work here, working in food waste policy, date labeling, it's very similar, we're planting the seeds, and then when there's an opportunity for us to all kind of act, we're able to kind of jump in. So appreciate that. Okay, let's talk a little bit about stakeholder engagement, because I think that's something applies regardless of what policy you're working on, what space you're coming from, is definitely very relevant for planning and policy. I know Sydney, you're sitting inside government, and so you're working a lot with third parties and sitting from that angle. Danielle, Andrea, you're in the nonprofit space, so you're kind of both representing the environment and the people and, kind of sitting outside. Jairo, you're kind of sitting in this in-between of nonprofit, but also sitting in this business space. So would be curious to hear from all of you kind of what is your experience and the lessons that you've learned about the importance of engaging with stakeholders. How do you kind of uplift diverse voices and make sure that you're engaging people kind of throughout the process when you're working on policy? So anyone is welcome to jump in.
Yeah, I think that our approach has been industry. So we have members today that are the largest composters in North America. We Care Denali, Sinagro. I mean, these guys have presence in most cities across the country. So that has brought validity to our discussions when we are speaking in front of policymakers. And policymakers are eventually the ones that allow us. Unfortunately, both the regulator, like the DEP or the DQ in Virginia, our DEP or the Florida DEP, it is really up to them to permit anything that goes forward. Even though the counties and the municipalities have some control in the state of New Jersey, it is the counties, as similar in Florida, where they make the decisions of how the flow of the MSW goes and how the characteristics are. So partnering with stakeholders that are, wealthy and well-rounded has helped us bring that validity. In New Jersey, because of past experiences with bad sites that have gone smelly, that are out of balance, whatever, they've had to shut down, and people lost their jobs at the regulator site. And so they're very suspicious of any type of composting. So what they've done, and we have tipping fees at $120 in most parts of the state, that they have been able to move away from traditional composting, even enclosed composting or gore cover composting, to more of a anaerobic device. So today in New Jersey, you will see the largest anaerobic operations, which is Trenton Renewables, and the new one coming online, which is Linden Renewables. So it shows you that they prefer to go with these big in-vessel type operations, which can be in a way holistic because they're doing it all, right? They're doing energy, they're doing some composting if they figure out how to fix that soil amendment, but they're very expensive propositions. These are, the latest one coming online is going to be taking 1,500 tons a day. That's a $400 million investment. But it seems like that's where our state in New Jersey is going because of that relationship with the regulator who is the one who ultimately permits it. In Florida, it's very different. In Florida, the legislator has decided to omit food waste from the recyclables, so he kind of promoted control flows in the county. So if you have a county like the one I live in, Palm Beach County, it's prohibited to compost there. It's prohibited to start any program of composting because the control flow of the county says that everything has to go into an incinerator. And these are not your regular bad incinerators that most of us have, or in New Jersey or in Michigan or in other cities. These are Gen 3 European state-of-the-art WTEs that are now being categorized as recycling operations. So that industry is taking a hold, but we know that burning food waste is bad for an incinerator. It gets wet, right? So we are convincing them then that, look, you need to have now a compost operation. In Europe, WTEs always go along with a composter. In Florida, no, it only goes with FPL, Florida Power and Light. So they omitted that. But not every county is doing that. So teaming up with these organizations has brought me a lot of know-how as to what the solution you can bring to the town. And then, of course, the funding. We're recipients of the SWIFTers and all these grants that they mentioned, NRCS, USDA, EPA. All these grants have allowed us to put little seeds in small municipalities to start small pilot diversion projects. And they're watching that. The constituents are watching, the regulators are watching, and so they see that with new practices, new performance practices, sites are not going to start smelling because nobody wants a food waste site behind their backyard, right? So that's kind of, especially Florida, where it's so, South Florida is so crowded, New Jersey as well. So it's always that importance to make yourself available to work within a coalition. So I think that our success, or part of the success, has been that we are agnostic to technology, as long as you divert it from the landfill. And if we're working towards soil health, Florida being number 2 agriculture in the country, that is a very important activity. The same with parts of New Jersey. So soil health has become another opportunity where you usually get an open arm when you're talking about recycling food waste or whatever residual is in that farm, manure or so forth, versus the city. So I encourage you to go down that path and not just straight to the capital where there's some big players and you're going to get really crushed, but start with, I call it in corporate, you call it a pull strategy. You pull and you straight, so you're working down in grassroots, creating activities, and then at the same time you're bringing information, and eventually they will listen to you because they know that it does work.
So it sounds like it's a bit of a balance of both finding your coalition, so engaging your allies and like finding ways to kind of uplift other people who are out there, but then also understanding where the enemies or the people who might be kind of against a policy that you're for, where they're coming from and like what their pushback is. Because it sounds like, you know, with the wet material isn't great for incineration, there's a business case for them then to be able to have a different solution kind of in this space. So,
You always have to, we're not, disposal of garbage is a need. I mean, you have to have disposal mechanisms. You can recycle some of it and you have to dispose. So we're not against it. We are against organics being disposed of, but we're not against disposal operations. And so that has brought us closer to them, and they want to listen. Eventually, you know, I always tell them I've been thrown out of better places, but they do listen to us sometimes. And we hope that Florida, who right now, I did a speech last year, at Vegas show, Waste Expo, and it was called Composting in the Land of Incineration. Believe me, it was very surprising that most people in North America are not aware that Florida is going towards incineration of all their materials.
Yeah, that's horrible. Hopefully there's a way to kind of a policy change to kind of maneuver around that. But Andrea, I know from working with you really closely on date labels, you know, one of the things that we get asked all the time is, oh, well, what do businesses think about this idea of standardizing date labels? They must be against it because it's regulation. So I'm curious if you could speak to like your experience working with business and kind of passing this policy.
Sure. And Assemblymember Irwin was probably the best sponsor for us on AB 660 because she has a reputation of stakeholder engagement and really working with diverse audiences to make sure that her policies are going to be effective. And we had numerous conversations with food retailers, processors, manufacturers, the regulators who at the state level were looking at food products, ensuring that we were going to be talking to anyone who could potentially be have a say in the process. And because so many businesses had already moved forward on their own practices, that was a huge boon for us to be able to move the needle on a statewide level. And being able to talk to manufacturers around what precisely was needed for them to be able to change their stamps really helped inform what the timeline would look like. And that, I think, was a critical component of our success.
One of the things that we find when we talk to stakeholders, the real benefit is that not only can we understand barriers, but we can understand how food loss and waste reduction can actually help them get to where they want to go. And so it's kind of like, I think about it being like the jelly to the peanut butter. You know, how can we add on to what they're doing to make it better? And because no one gets excited about food loss and waste reduction. It's, you know, it's a clunky term, and it should be a means to a better end. And people will tell you, we heard that in different panels, that what people say and what they actually do are very different. So everyone will tell you that they want to save money, but they won't actually do the things that will help them save money. So that's not a motivator. They think it is, but it's not. You know, what they really want is they want to support their community. They want to make sure that people have food to eat. They want to make sure that soil is healthy so that more food can grow. They want to make sure their basements aren't flooding. They want to make sure that they look cool. I mean, really, that's probably what everyone wants. So how can we use what we do to make everyone look better? And so it's important to have those conversations and also get outside of kind of the expected people that you would talk to. So, you know, everyone wants to talk to residents, and you'll talk to schools, you'll talk to legislators. But some of the things we think about are, well, who wins when we win? So who benefits when we have a healthy environment? Well, the outdoor community benefits. Anyone who sells products in the outdoor community. Michigan has a very robust outdoor, we're known for our outdoors. So how can you tap into other sectors that are maybe unexpected and connect with them that way and really use, again, be the jelly, add on to what is already in motion, add on to what people already want, and then show them how food loss and waste reduction can help them get to what they already dream of, instead of trying to make them come over to learn something new and adapt to what you think that they should do.
Yeah, I love that. So what I'm hearing from you too on this is like to make sure you're staying curious and learning as you're going. I mean, we all come to this space with the reasons that we're here. I mean, if that's, you're coming to it because you're interested in climate solutions, you're coming to it because you're interested in hunger solutions, that might be your reason, but people have their reasons too, and whether that's like economics, so with date labeling, like maybe it's, a business wants to respond to what their consumers want, but, just kind of, as long as you keep learning, you'll keep adapting and you'll have good, effective policy that's able to actually be implemented. But yeah, Sydney, how about you? What's your experience been working with stakeholders?
Yeah, so our main stakeholder that we work with often is colleges and universities. And I think on the note of like learning from others and not always needing to reinvent the wheel, is that there was already so much movement around just like action around food waste happening on college campuses, and it was something that sustainability offices or professors or students were really engaged with on a college campus. And so as we've been working to really develop our program and give the outlines of how this is going to work and how we're going to collect data and track metrics on how effective these different programs are, we've tried to be really intentional about meeting with colleges and universities and understanding what is happening on their campuses and what has worked well and what hasn't worked well. I'm currently working on compiling a report on the state of food waste in Virginia, and most of that report is highlighting what is already going on campuses. And so over the past couple of months, we have met with so many schools across the state, and we have learned so much about the different programs that they are implementing. And I think it's really inspiring to see how much people care about these things and see what kind of solutions people have already come up with. Like, we don't need to recreate a new program in all of these places, and we really want different stakeholders that we're engaging with to also engage with each other. And so we've been trying to create spaces where these different schools can learn from their peers and get connected to the other people in this space and understand the specific context that they're all working within. I think my best example of that is when I started my role, my team was really excited about the food rescue portion of our grant, which we are all very excited about, but I think that they had a very different perception of what food rescue would look like on a college campus. And there was a lot of talk about buying everyone refrigerated trucks and doing X, Y, and Z and like creating these huge operations. And having worked in a dining hall for 4 years, I was like, I don't think that is actually what's happening on a college campus. And so we've been looking for more unique ways to divert food on a college campus and also meet need on college campuses. There is a lot of food insecurity among college students, and I think it's something that's often overlooked. There's kind of this perception that college students just like eat pizza and ramen, and that's okay. And that's just part of college rather than a real food insecurity issue. And so connecting college students to food that is already on their campus is one of our main goals. Virginia Commonwealth University, which is an urban university right in Richmond, which is where I'm based, has this little RAM pantry and it's just RAM fridges and little RAM pantries. But they're communal fridges and communal pantries that are based all around campus. And dining halls will divert their leftover food at the end of the day into clamshells and put them directly into those fridges on campus so that any student can go and take that food. And so they are rescuing the food from the dining halls, but they're putting it right back in their community where they know that their students really need it. They have a really high rate of food insecurity on their campus. And so programs like that we never would have thought of if we hadn't been engaging with our stakeholders, and it's an idea that we're really excited about and they're really excited about sharing. And so connecting with stakeholders ourselves and also helping them connect with each other, I think has been one of the things that we're most excited about and one of our most helpful solutions as we try to develop this program and structure it in a way that's going to be really effective for schools.
That's great. So it sounds a lot like make sure you're listening. Don't assume that you know what the best solution will be until you actually talk to the people who are on the ground working and doing that. If you want to be kind of a change maker, a solution provider, you kind of have to actually seek it out and learn from people, so that's great. Okay, so pivoting a little bit, I mean, I know that we're here to talk about state policy, but I can't help but think about how state policy is kind of fitting into the bigger picture, and whether that's national policy, how kind of all the things that you're working in fit into kind of the national bigger picture, or how you think about how your policy can be applied in other states in the way that we can like share lessons learned across state lines and outside of our own jurisdictions. So Andrea, I'll start with you because, I mean, this was mentioned at yesterday's opening with the California date labeling bill. Ever since that passed, what is it, like 7 to 12 other states or something have introduced some sort of bill that's doing something similar. Is that the goal, or is that like kind of maybe the next step towards something national? How are you kind of thinking about that?
Yeah, I don't want to work on every state's date labeling bill. But you're right, 7 states in 2025 introduced bills around date labeling, and several of them mirror California's exactly, but several of them don't. And I think that that is going to continue this patchwork that we have already. USDA introduced a request for information about date labels. It would be really exciting to have the agency decide that they were going to standardize date labels on their own. Congress could move forward the Food Date Labeling Act. It's always been bipartisan. It has had a Congressional Budget Office score of 0, meaning it would cost the federal government nothing in order to standardize date labels and ensure all of that money that is going to waste now is going back into the pockets of consumers who are very price conscious at this point. So I think that we do have an opportunity to see some of the work that's happening in states really push the needle that we needed some businesses to move on it first, then we can have the state of California enable this in a very large part of the market share, and then hopefully we can have this across the country. But at the very least, Californians will be able to interpret their date labels starting in 2026. So we're making some progress.
Amazing. I mean, the fact that we're all here in a state, or some of us are from this state, but we're all here in a different state from our own, and we're interacting with food on a daily basis. Like, any one standardized solution at the state level isn't really going to be standardized if it's the patchwork kind of continues. So thanks for sharing that. And then Jairo, I'm curious from you, because you've mentioned kind of this experience working both in New Jersey and in Florida. Kind of how have you had to adapt across state lines and like take lessons that you've learned in one state to another?
Yeah, I think that we always try to bring to the regulator and to the legislator where we feel things are working. So Massachusetts, for example, has probably the most successful food waste ban in effect today. And I think it was Lorenzo from CET shared with us yesterday. And he said the reason why it's effective is because they had a different enforcement activity. They had an incentive in there. And so we brought that know-how and that particular narrative of the bill back to the DEP. In the case of New York, another successful food waste ban was their tier permitting structure at the DEP, as well as some additional funding. And so tier permitting is related to the amount of feedstocks that you're processing and the type of feedstocks that you're processing. In our state of New Jersey, it's a Class C for either 300,000 or 10,000. And so that really put out a lot of these micro processors, community processors or municipalities, to the point that they cannot afford that license. And so we brought tier permitting, and we use also North Carolina tiers permitting, and we share it with the DEP, who is the bottleneck in our state, to bring this kind of stuff forward. And that constant sharing of information, we're not allowed to bring anything from California because they just don't want to listen to that. It kind of, you know when they turn you down, so you keep it. But we learn a lot from what's happening out here. And I think the solid waste plan that came out of the city of Seattle 10 years ago was incredibly interesting, and we use that to share with counties who are developing solid waste plants, which have now to include organics. The EPR bill in Colorado that came out, that is a major bill, and you should look at that language because that is something that everybody's interested. The main players want to participate. The trouble is always where and how much are you going to charge for that, and who's going to administer those monies. So taking it to Florida, down there, that's really different, but we play a different game. I think that one thing that everybody has in legislative activities is that the legislator always will consult whatever language you introduce with the DEP. And therefore, you need to be friends with the DEP, get certified with the DEP, and learn that particular bill or that, the solid waste materials codes. In New Jersey, it's like 100 pages. In Florida, it's only 2 pages. And I think if you're going to open an operation in Florida, it's like a 1-pager versus in New Jersey, it's like 50 pages. But at the same time, whatever you introduce to a legislator or your champion of a particular bill, he will always consult. So we always play that sense. And then we bring these languages of successful. So organizations like REFID, like the U.S. Composting Council, like BPI, like ISLR, all those organizations I'm part of at some level and role so that I can extract and have them then take it all into the federal level and help us with little denominations and bills and concepts. And New Jersey did have Cory Booker as the agriculture chair the last 2 years, so I got to speak to him, and he put a sign on it. So it was really good with him. These days, I don't know who to call anymore up there. But we do work through these organizations because they do have the funding. So I'm very happy to see REFID and ISLR, who's based in Washington, D.C. So that's kind of like my advice. Look at how you can see these successful programs and then carefully introduce it to your regulator and bring the champion with that particular person that you think is running. Now, don't just pick anybody, because in Florida, there's a lady she's a very nice representative, and every bill that she comes up with, it doesn't even make it out her door. It's dead. So we're now going to the Republican side and bringing it on a different perspective. It's called the Right to Farm bill. Oh, Right to Farm. They love their farmers out there. So we're introducing composting in the Right to Farm bill. And now we're all introducing, but we're working with these 2 entities and finding the key people. So always find the key people, team up with these guys and share. I think SB 13 and your labeling bills, I don't mention them, but I bring that language in my discussions and our content as they always ask us for some feedback as a stakeholder. So that's...
I'd say, we're really lucky to be working in a relatively bipartisan space for food waste, and if we can really take advantage of that and really lean into the fact that there is going to be a case for kind of different sides of the aisle, and make sure that I hear you too on making sure you're engaging with the regulators so that you can hear from them what their issues with your bill are going to be, so you can address them ahead of time, either change the language in the bill or already kind of have a prepared response for why that's still important or whatever you're doing. But anybody else want to jump in with anything?
I think the bipartisan issue is really interesting. In Michigan, the area around Detroit, Detroit and kind of west of Detroit is blue, but most of Michigan is red. And one of the things that we really try to focus on is not casting food loss and waste reduction as strictly an environmental issue that may turn off other people, because what we find is that when we talk about it in terms of community resilience and using our resources well, of course saving money, those messages get people really excited that may vote Republican. And so not only, I think it's important to remember that yes, this is a bipartisan issue, but it also takes shifting our language a little bit sometimes, and being comfortable not using climate or methane or greenhouse gas, but then just making sure that you're kind of big tent with your words, so that people who may be a little put off by the environmental messages are still supportive, because at the end of the day, everyone really does believe that food shouldn't be thrown away. except for the landfill people, but everyone else agrees.
Yeah, I like to say that when you're talking about recycling food waste, I mean, if you're in a red state, you're talking about landfills not there anymore. So that's the main discussion. So there's no bipartisan, Republican or Democrat. They got a problem. They have nowhere to go except truck it to Mississippi. And Mississippi's saying, we don't want it anymore, so you're going to have to build something down there to do it. And so then you work with them. And so I find that it's the business proposition that you bring to them. They are looking for revenues. They're looking for new jobs. And this industry of composting, be there composting or anaerobic digestion, does bring that opportunity. Of course, it does help to introduce the emissions discussion, which is a problem for everybody. But climate change, those words have somehow disappeared. And so we've always had the approach that I don't care where you stand, what your background is, what your religion belief is. This is a problem, and it's how do we deal with our municipal solid waste? And it's a problem that anybody has to discuss. And so how your disposals and how your recycling formats are. And so it is our focus to ensure that organics are being reintroduced because maybe it's a farming emphasis in that place. Maybe you want to generate kilowatts, but at the same time you need to resolve the issue that what do you do with the digester? You compost it. So soil health or erosion, turf dressing. Compost, I don't know if you've ever seen the compost list of how many things it does. It's like 30 types of products that it's working around. And you have compost that is armory listed or just regular compost. It goes up and down every night. So the opportunity to work with your legislator is bring him a revenue opportunity, bring him a new solution to the biggest problem that we have today, which is dealing with our garbage.
Thank you for that, and I'll just add to one piece of advice that we often give our coalition members is if you look at kind of what a previous legislator has worked on, you'll get an idea of kind of what their interest is and a way to kind of tie it in. So I recognize we're kind of starting to run up on time. I'll just do one quick last question to all of you, if you can do maybe a little quick fire here. So what's kind of one more thing that you've learned about working in state policy, or like one piece of advice that you would give either to a fellow state policy advocate or maybe someone in government who's wanting to start working in this space in their jurisdiction? We'll just maybe run it down, Jairo, if you want to go.
Yeah, know your stuff. Know your stuff. Get well-rounded. Understand the technical issue, understand the regulation issue, and be prepared to deal with some very well-funded people who are going to push you back. But if you are well-prepared and surrounded by people who can back you up, perhaps an attorney or perhaps a former regulator, it really adds to your effectiveness and validity in the discussion.
I would say stay the course. I think we've really have not put in enough time to see all of the impact of all of the work we're doing. And at least for my issues, it has taken us a long time to get where we are. And we're hopefully at this cusp of a wave where all of the work that we have put into it so far is about to really show us the results of our impact. So keep with it, we're almost there.
I would say, I think that be open to changing your ideas and be open to adapting to the things that you learn along the way. I think you're going to encounter a lot of different perspectives across your work. And so developing your plans and your policies to meet the moment and fit the circumstances that you're working in is really important. And the more that you can be open to listening and changing your ideas and changing your policies and what might work in your state, I think the more success that you're going to have engaging with your community and continuing to move these issues forward.
Do the work so that when the legislator goes to do the policy, that they look good. The last thing that they want is a riot on their hands and people calling them up and complaining and criticizing them. So have that grassroots work done so that when the policy is just the icing on the cake and they don't have to worry about any blowback.
Amazing. Thank you all. I'll say we are a very small but mighty community here in food waste. I mean, yes, there's something like 800 people here, but I think we can all experience in our own jurisdictions. You know, there might be a few advocates that we're working with, but you can seek other advocates out who are very willing to help. We're in a very friendly space. If you're maybe learning something new, someone else already knows the best resources for it. I'll give a shameless plug for the Zero Food Waste Coalition if you're not already a member to come chat with Andrea and I about joining. So thank you again to all the panelists for joining us. Thank you to ReFed for hosting us. I am supposed to tell you that next up on our agenda is we have a short break before our final main stage session, which is going to be featuring the Catalytic Grant Fund awardee announcement and a conversation with Victor Friedberg and Matt Rogers. So that starts at noon on the 3rd floor. So thank you all.